All right, everybody is piling in. I'm pretty sure they can hear me. If you can hear me, raise your hand, throw a question in the question and answer, something. Want to make sure everybody can hear me. Hey, Tony, Chris, everyone can hear us. This is fantastic. I appreciate it. You guys can't see it right now, but I am in. We're going to just give it, so we're a minute till start. I'm going to give it a couple minutes for people to come in. I am sunny Palm Desert. It's a frigid 75 degrees today. I feel really bad for everybody back home, but I'm excited to have a little color to my skin after all of that. Okay, we have a lot of people who signed up. We're going to let them filter in, but you guys were so courteous to show up on time. We are going to get this started. So you don't know who I am, actually, welcome. How to sell your tenant-occupied property. My name is Benjamin Ficker. I am a multifamily broker with KW Commercial. Most of you who are on today have seen my webinars before, participated in them before, and I'm joined today by Martine Tamick. Why don't you say hello to everybody and give a little intro?
Hi, everybody. I'm Martine Tamick. I'm a residential / multifamily broker here in the Portland metro area. I've been doing this for about 10 years now and am a nut for numbers. Today, we are going to go over what it's like to sell a tenant occupied property, the ins and outs, the things that we want to be aware of as we move towards selling. And it's nothing like selling a single family residential home when it's owner occupied or vacant. You're so invested and it's such a quick process, right? We can get our listing walkthrough done really quickly, get the number updated within hours, get scheduled for staging, get the photos done, and get the marketing all done in 2 weeks' time. Today, we're going to talk about the extended time that we need to make sure that you capture the numbers you want when selling a owner or a multifamily tenant occupied property.
Or even a single family tenant occupied property.
Yeah. Or a
Yeah,
single tenant.
perfect. Yeah, cool. If there's nothing else you take away from this webinar today, you could leave right now, as long as you remember this, that your tenant relationships could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, it might not be that extreme if it's a single family home, it could be, but definitely as you start to move into the larger units, you can really see how this is going to play out. The multifamily value, so most of what I do is multifamily. This is geared towards small multifamily. We're going to have some examples from some single family. And then if you've got larger properties, some of the owner user stuff won't come into play, but the relationship stuff we talk about will come into play. Multifamily values traditionally come from the streams of income that is produced by your rental properties, right? If you got two properties, one's bringing in a gross $120,000, netting $20,000. That's going to be valued less than the same property grossing $120,000, netting $60,000, right? People want more income. That's what they're buying. The sticks and bricks are just what facilitates those streams of income. So I think there's a better way to look at it, though. It's not just the streams of income it produces, but it's also the impact of tenant relation. And Martina and I have a couple of very recent examples that we're going to go over where had one proceeded, it could have cost her upwards of $50,000. And for the one that is proceeding, there was that type of an impact on his bottom line. So what I'll say, I finally have a quote out there. This is what I'm putting out there in the world. In a market with rent control like ours here in Portland, your relationships with your tenants have a larger impact on your value than your NOI. And we'll get into the reasons why that in a bit, but just think about that we're not telling anybody to sell now, but as you're thinking of making moves in the next 12 to 24 months or even 3 to 5 years, what can you do along the way to make these relationships a little stronger and a little better, so when the time comes, it's not going to get in the way of you netting what you want to net. First, we're going to talk about the traditional real estate stuff, right? You've got your leases and you got your occupancy and you got your rents. With occupancy, you've got three options. It's going to be a vacant unit or a vacant property. You're going to be on fixed term leases or you're going to be on month to month. Now, I guess the fourth option would be a squatter, but that's a whole nother webinar. And then you're going to have rent levels. We've got market rate rent. We got your within 1 to 2 rent raises to get to market level, and then you're substantially under market. And for the last 5 years, being in number three wasn't nearly as much of a detriment as it is today. So if you're in that number three, I bet you can guess what my advice is going to be, but we'll get to that in a second. You're going to have any combination of these two factors, right? If you've got a single family home, you could be vacant. It could be on a fixed term lease with any three levels of rent, or it could be month to month with any of those three levels of rent. When it's vacant, a buyer gets to set their own, that should say rent prices. They might believe the market hype on rent levels. When I first started in this business 18 years ago now, I remember engaging with a duplex owner who insisted that he wasn't going to sell his duplex unless it was fully occupied, and he was going to occupy that at what the time was going to be $600 a month per side, which then was 20 to 30% below market. He thought that was the only way to get the value he wanted out of it, when I was trying to tell him, if a buyer comes in and thinks they can rent, market rate might be 900, but if he thinks he can get 1,200, he's going to pay more. So why not let them believe that? Now, after the vacant ones, we've got fixed term leases, and you could have market level rents within 1 to 2 rent raises, or you could be substantially under market. Fixed term offers an owner some sense of stability, but when you're preparing to sell, if you're not a number one or a number two, that fixed term could really come back and hurt you, right? So when somebody buys a property, they've got rent caps here in the Portland metro area. And if they're going to buy it today and that lease isn't going to end for another 9 months, that's an extra 9 months that they can't start making progress on building up their NOI, which means they're going to pay you less for the property. A lot of this might seem obvious, but from the conversations I've had lately, you got to get your rents up. Month to month, again, market level rents within 1 to 2 rent raises or substantially under market. Month to month market level rents, just fine. Month to month within 1 to 2 rent raises is great. Ideally, you can get those rent notices out before you hit them. But if not, a buyer comes in knowing they can they can pay a pro forma price because they know they can get those rent notices out much quicker. And then if it's a substantially under market rent, you give that buyer the opportunity to start making major rehab decisions or rent raises across the board. It gives that buyer some flexibility.
Ben, and I would say sometimes we think as landlords that keeping a tenant happy and giving them that price break is keeping that person in. Like you said, it keeps that stability, and it also is undermining your growth potential, your growth value, all of that along the way, so that when you do get there and you are substantially under rent and you do want to sell the house, now you're taking that haircut, or you're having to wait, right? And build that back up. Although it seems like sometimes that you're doing this good thing and you're also keeping that steadiness, right? That you're not turning it over, you're not taking that turnover cost, but that turnover cost on a long-term value, like a long-term basis, is going to hurt you if you're not at least keeping within that 1 to 2 rent raises. Keeping it substantially under value later will cost you. And ultimately, as investors, we want to stay within that. Definitely, I understand keeping somebody there and not having that turnover cost, but we also want to be thinking strategically and not letting that piece get in the way of real profits in the future.
Here's a great example. I'm not going to get too specific because this is a property that's on the market. There's a property available right now. The owner has owned, this place was built 40 years ago. This owner's owned it for 36 years, something like that. The spread in rents goes from 900 to 1895, all identical properties. There is no way for somebody to purchase this property without putting at least 60% down because of those substantially lower rents, which means nobody's going to buy this thing with 60% down to hit the debt service coverage ratio. So we all love our tenants, most of our tenants. If we've screened them, they're great tenants, and we all get them a Starbucks gift card every Christmas. But their rent levels need to be within those 1 to 2 spots. You can't. It might just seem like you're doing them a favor by keeping them at 900 when it should be 1,200, or 900 when it should be 1,800, because you love them so much. But you've got to do the math when it comes time to sell. And because of rent control, you can't just flip that switch. You can't go from 900 to 1800. You have to take these incremental steps along the way. And for some property owners out there, this example I was given, I was talking to a potential buyer for it. It was going to take 7 years. If nobody moved out on the rent increase notices, it was going to take 7 years to get up to today's market level rents. And that just, it's unfeasible for the seller. And the problem is we've lived in a very rare moment in time that we are past. We are past this rare moment in time where nobody cared about that. People would pay pro forma numbers all day long. That's not fundamentally how real estate investing is supposed to work. And now we're getting back to fundamentals. All right, let's jump on to the next thing. So we've got top dollar scenario for an investor user, fixed term with market level rents. That's great. There's nothing they got to do. You've been keeping your maintenance up. You've been keeping those rents up. You can probably sell that if you're in the 5 to 12 unit range. You're probably selling it at 5 to 5.5 cap. If you've got just below, you might be selling it a little bit lower, but as long as there's some upside, someone's going to do it. That is the dream scenario. For an owner user, which is anything from 2 to 4 units or a single family, the best is going to have a vacancy available and market level rents, because that owner user wants to be able to move in right away. The financing rules for an owner user of a multifamily property, or for any property really, is you have to be able to move in within 60 days of close of property. So when you're going to sell, if somebody wants to move into your duplex, if they want to move into your single family, we'll get to the duplex in a sec. Someone wants to move into your single family, you have to give that 90-day notice to that tenant so that you can then close, and then the buyer has to move in within 60 days after close. Theoretically, that's possible. Not a lot of buyers who don't want to be landlords are open to taking on that tenant for the last 60 days of their lease, which means an extended close for you, which means extended loan locks for this buyer, which means they're passing that cost on to you. So that vacancy, yeah, that's all money, right? That vacancy gives them the opportunity to move in the day they close. They're good to go. Everyone's happy. And the other units are at market level. Month to month is okay. You can do the notice thing we talked about. And if you've got multiple units, having those market level rents. And if you're not at market level rents, being able to give those rent increase notices right away is huge. People want to get started on making their improvements to the property. The worst, fixed term under market level rents. This is really hard to get around. We're not in a world where people are buying negative cash flowing properties anymore. It's just not. The only way it happens is if there's so much massive upside that they're willing to take on that risk, which probably means they're going to boot everybody out as soon as their lease is up anyway. But it's not in this market with what it takes to close an investment deal. Good luck with that. It's really difficult to get done. So you've got to consider the buyer of your property. We touched on this for a little bit. 5+ units, you've got to hit a debt service coverage ratio of 1.25 or greater. So if your debt service is $50,000, that means your net operating income needs to be $62,500, right? It's got to be 1.25 times your debt service. For 2 to 4 units, you've got to have cash flow on real numbers. It's a little different if it's an owner user of that small plex. And I made this note under the single family rental. An owner user is always going to pay more. The example that got Martine and I thinking about this that came up last week was this woman with a condo getting $1,695, great rent, wanted to sell it in the low threes this lease through March of next year. The only way this thing would break even was putting over 50% down or selling it for $200,000. We had comps at $295, but no investor would take on that tenant for the privilege of losing $700 a month. And that is, if it's 3%, they're not losing that money. But right now, rates, 7%, 6.5%, 7%. There's buy downs and all of that stuff, but you've got to look at the actual cash flows that you're asking somebody to take on. And I understand it's your property. You want what you want out of it, but you have to have some meat on the bone for that end buyer. So Here's the magic sauce. Get your rents up, get your expenses down, get your leases in order. And yes, I said tenant relationships are just as important as the rent sets. We'll spend a little bit more time on this stuff here. Tenants control access to your property, and access equals price. Now, I know we've got some property managers on here, and if I get this wrong, they're gonna tell me. But the way it works is, as a landlord, you have the right to give a 24-hour notice to enter the property for showings, for whatever. It is what it is. Your tenant may refuse that notice, and then your next step is to force their hand. You give them a chance to reschedule. If they don't do that, then there's a court. You got to give notice. They have 2 weeks to reschedule, and then after that then they're going to this just occurred to us. We had a tenant. My client's great, loves his tenants. Property management was all right. They love their tenants. We moved everything around 4 different times for this tenant to get access. Not my advice. That's what they wanted to do. Moved it around 4 different times. Finally, we go to get access. We say, this is it. We're getting in. He says no. We do the whole thing. He has to give us access by March 6th. On March 5th, he says, if you can come in tomorrow, we'll make it work. Obviously, we want to do it. We want the deal to close. We get everybody in, make it all happen. But this has dragged on for over 5 months now, right? The first time that tenant refuses entry, you're polite, you do the right thing, you help reschedule on a timeline that works for them. And then if they refuse, you get those notices out. You get moving. You have to protect your investment with these properties because that type of delay, especially over the last 5 months, has ended up costing people anywhere in the $25,000 to $35,000 range because of this tenant access problem. It might not seem like it. You might think, oh, there's a lot of tenants out there who don't want anyone in their space without them being there. Unfortunately for them, that's not how this works. This is not their space. This is your investment property. They are paying you to live there. They have a right to privacy and all of that stuff. But with the notices, with the 24-hour notices, you have a right to access. And if you stop exercising that, they will take advantage. And you can't let that happen because it will cost you down the road. And I'm not just about the money here, right? But that's why we buy multifamily investment real estate. There's extenuating circumstances. There's COVID. There's literally people get shot. That stuff happens, right? You make adjustments. But at the end of the day, you bought this to make money for yourself, to make money for your family, to pass it on for generational wealth, legacy wealth. And it's much better to pass on a $700,000 triplex than a $600,000 or a $500,000 triplex because of the tenant issues, access issues that you had. And I'm not exaggerating those numbers. It can be that big of a deal.
And Ben, we're lucky that from when you started this sale and the last 5 months that interest rates have stayed within range, but pop up another percent, right?
Imagine if this was, imagine if this had started in April or March of last year, and then the 5 months after that, their interest rate would have doubled, and this buyer would have gone away, and this property would never have been sold.
Yeah. So timing would be super important in that piece too, right? To have that relationship, just so you can control that timing.
Yep. So communicate early and often. And part of the reason is your tenant, a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to tell my tenant because they might move. Well, in some circumstances, you might want them to move. What we advised this person with the condo was tell your tenant now that you're going to sell this next year when her lease is up. She might get a job opportunity in the next 2 months and ask to leave early. If that happens, A, you can now sell to an owner occupant, or B, you could get a market level lease in there and you didn't have to pay relocation. You didn't have to do all of that stuff. So communicate your intentions early and often in the event this type of stuff happens. Pre-inspect your property. Once you get going in the sale of the property, there's a handful of points of access, right? A, we need to walk through it, before it goes on the market. Then there's the showing stuff, which we'll talk about. Then there's inspections and appraisal. And if the inspections lead to repairs, then you've got contractor access. There's all these opportunities that can disturb your tenants. And yes, legally they have to allow for this stuff, but when they don't allow for it, it's not a 24-hour fix. It's a 20-day fix, right? And all of that time costs you money. Costs the buyer money, costs you money. So if you can get that pre-inspection done, then you're set up for the showing scenario that I'm going to discuss next. Your showing options are subject to interior inspection. If you own multifamily, this is what you're familiar with, right? That means somebody is looking at the numbers, likes the investment opportunity. If they have that pre-inspection, they're already doing the math in their head. They're going to give you an offer that's much more likely to close than somebody who's never seen the property, just looks at the number, gets in and says, oh, you know what? This is going to need, it's got galvanized, it's this repair, that repair. I'm going to take $50,000 off the price. It's very common in multifamily, give them what they're asking, beat them up after, right? But if you can cut that off at the knees, if you can say, here's an inspection report, and by the way, we know what this stuff is going to cost, you take all of that momentum away from them, and you're much more likely to close at the price you want. And beneficially, you're not going to disturb your tenant nearly as much. And when you don't disturb your tenant nearly as much, they're much more likely to cooperate. Everything is going to go a lot smoother, and you're going to make more money on your sale. The second option, set a schedule with your tenants, right? This might be something like, hey, every Saturday for the next 4 weeks from 1 to 5 o'clock, we're going to allow showings to come in. Here's your notice now. We need this time blocked off. Now, I would recommend you, for all of those Saturdays, you get them some coffee one week or movie tickets the next week, something to help them get out of the house and get out of the way. But it's important that brokers, especially for owner-user brokers or owner-occupant buyers, that they get a chance to see the property ahead of time because they're not used to buying it from the investment standpoint. So number one is the best. Number two is okay. And that 24-hour notice, you can do legally, but it is impossible, especially if you've got a fourplex, right? You're not going to give 24-hour notices to see all 4 units every single time somebody wants to see the property, especially in a market with low inventory where everybody wants to run out and see the property that just hit the market, right? It will frustrate your tenants. It will frustrate you. It'll cost you money because you've got to have your property manager deliver all of those notices every single time. And then you got buyers who don't show up. It's a whole thing. It's weird that I have to say this, but don't do this one. We see listings like this pop up all the time, and it blows my mind. It is not respectful to your tenants. It's not respectful to buyers, and it's going to end up costing you money in the long run. So,
Right, Ben. Also, yes, right now, it's so hard. Buyers have a little bit more power than they've had in the past, right? Mm-hmm. We've been asking for what we've wanted for a really long time. And with this interest rate change, buyers have a little bit more pull or push on this. And if they can't get into a property or they're having to wait or they don't have a set schedule and you're not putting that up front, I think that you might scare away some of those potential buyers, which then every time we lose somebody, we're decreasing the potential of getting your numbers.
As interest rates, our buyer pool shrinks. And every hurdle you're putting in front of them, you're making that pool shrink even more. And that's not what you want when you're going to sell your property. You want as much exposure, as big of a pool of buyers as you can get. Yep. And then we talked a little bit about access for inspections and appraisals. This can get tricky because we're dealing with other people's schedules, right? We can't control an inspector's day. We can't control an appraiser's day. We had an appraiser on a recent deal where over the next 3 weeks, they had 2 slots open. Which one did we want? I'm like, we have to get in then, or this thing's going to turn into extending a lock, cost some money, and all of that stuff trickles down to the seller. And now that the buyers are having more options, it's much easier, like you were saying, Martine, it's just much easier to walk away and go find the deal that's not as much of a hassle. Closing process. So once you've gotten through all of that stuff, it's very important when you go to close that you're communicating with your tenants along the way. In my perfect world, every single investment property is closing right around the 15th of the month. All the rents have come in, they're accounted for. You can get notices out for all of them to pay the next month's rent to the new owner, new property manager, whatever it is, and it's super easy. For the life of me, I cannot get everybody on that same page. People love to close on the 28th. They love to close on the 3rd. It makes accounting very difficult. But it's really important that this transitional time, especially if you're doing chargebacks for utilities and stuff like that, the accounting on all of this gets really complicated. So you just want to make sure that you set yourself up and think about this so that it's easier for everybody when you get. And then, so what we like to do is we like to send out a letter right before closing saying, hey, here's the information for your new owner. Your next rent check is due at, here's the address, here's where you're going to send it to, all of that stuff. We want to give that to them right at close or right before close so that your buyers not, or your tenants aren't wondering, what do we do with our check? And the other piece is there any back rent owed? You've got to square those books as much as possible before you get to that point. Because once you close, going back and getting any rent owed to you is just very unlikely. It's not going to be worth your time to get it done. Additional thoughts. Senate Bill 608 and the cash for keys. So Senate Bill 608 is what limits your ability as a seller to end tenancy. We also have our rent control, right? So for this year, we've got a 14.6% cap statewide. And in the city of Portland, you still have your soft cap of 9.9%, which means you can still raise it 14%. But if your tenant decides to move because of it, you have to pay a healthy chunk of money in relocation expenses. But in Portland, if you keep it at 9.9%, you won't have to pay that relocation. But statewide, the hard cap of 14.6, you can't go past that. I would like to throw out there, I don't have this bill number in front of me, but they are looking at reducing that from 7% plus CPI down to 3% plus CPI with a hard stop at 8%. So if you have that $900 a month rent instead of $1,800, your ability to get to market levels, if this bill passes, is statewide, you're stuck. You will have lost potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of value in your property. Okay, something to think about. Okay, so Senate Bill 608 gives the reasons, the landlord exceptions to ending tenancy. Not just ending tenancy, but people think their lease ends at the end of March, so then they're done. They're going to move out. That's not it. They have to be able to move over month to month or sign a new lease with you. You can't just say, hey, your lease is up, get out. That's not how it works anymore. So there's landlord reasons for demolish, for doing major repairs. Yourself or a family member is going to move in. The tricky one is if you're selling the property to an owner-occupant buyer, you can end that tenancy. Now, with a month-to-month, it's going to be 90-day notice. With a lease, it's still going to be 90-day notice, but that's not going to work if it's December and you're in March. The tricky part about the verbiage around that is it states is selling to an owner-occupant buyer if the unit is sold separate from any other unit. If you're in a duplex, that's not happening, right? That technically, that's not how it works. Now, I know we all have stories of where people have used Senate bills, right? People have said, it's an owner-occupant buyer, we're going to end the lease. But if you went to court and you read that verbiage, I don't want to be in the position of having to defend somebody doing that. Thankfully, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have to, but it's you just have to keep that in mind. When you go to sell your property to owner-occupant buyers, you've got to set this stuff up ahead of time. That's where cash for keys comes in, right? You can offer your tenants, they don't have to take it, but you can offer your tenants an amount of money to electively move out of the property, right? Maybe they're thinking of doing it anyway. Maybe they just want some cash, right? But really that number's floating right around $5,000, depending on the building class. But I've seen it as high as 10. I've seen it as low as 3. If you can evict somebody or they'll take $3,000 cash, give them $3,000 cash and be done with it. Don't do it until they've moved out, but that money is there. But that's where cash for keys comes in. You can't force that person to do it, but they can electively end their lease early and take that money and move out by a period of time. And logistically, you don't give that money until it's broom swept clean on their way out the door. Here's your cash. Because otherwise they'll take that money and squat and now you're screwed.
And with that, Ben, we usually recommend having an agreement in place, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
So it's not just a verbal agreement. We want to make sure that everybody has signed something just in case somebody has some sort of bad will and we don't end up
And
accomplishing what we want to.
yes, and that is not an agreement that Martine or I are drafting. Your property manager may, but I'm going to guess the property manager will tell you what I would tell you, which is hire an attorney to draft that for you. You don't want to screw that up. Okay. And we've got references for amazing property managers. Mr. Dan Hayes is on here, I believe, or he's great as a resource for this, or we've got attorneys to send you to as well. Okay. Closing thoughts. There are definitely valid reasons to sell in this market, even if netting a lower price than ideal. If you wanted to sell in 2020, 2021, early 2022, but you decided to wait for whatever reason, and you're going to net less now than you were a year ago, there are still reasons to do. Most of the people that I'm talking to, those reasons are opportunities in other markets and the legislative challenges we have coming down the pike. Increased rent control, capital gains tax for properties in the city of Portland, or in Multnomah County specifically. There's so many. It's very hard to be a landlord in the Portland metro area. And if you're tired of doing it and you can move that money to a different market, even if you're netting less now, buy a property with better upside in a more landlord friendly state. With that said, if you don't have to sell, don't sell right now. It's not, that hurts my financial pocketbook, right? Because I make money when people buy and sell properties. But for most people that I talk to, my advice is this: get your rents up, get your expenses down, get your leases in order, and we will talk in a year to 2 years to 3 years. You need to set yourself up for the best shot of success. And what that means is doing the work so that the buyer can buy close to turnkey, or they can pay a price that's not reflective of 7% interest rates. Or so here's
Having those
your
conversations with you now, Ben, saying having those conversations now. So even if you are a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, or you're, hey, where do I start? I am severely under asking. I do have bigger plans. Having those conversations with us now so that we can guide you so that when you get there, you are maximizing your profits, because at the end of the day, our goal is to make sure that you make what you need to make on this property, right?
Absolutely. Yep. So that leads into your next steps. Your next steps are to reach out to myself, Ben Ficker, multifamily broker, Martine Tamick, multifamily/residential broker. We're doing a thing called the property performance audit. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at your books. We're going to look at your profit and loss. We're going to look at your rent rolls. We're going to run it by our property management partners to see where the opportunities are, and tell you, here's the steps that you need to take so that when it is time for you to do something, you do something. 95% of you, it's going to be get rents up, get expenses down, get your leases in order. For the other 5% of you, you guys are doing great. Here's why right now might be a good time to sell. But that will be a big minority of you. Okay, so our contact information is here, and we, of course, will send out our info and a copy of the slides when we send this out. So we have some time for some Q&A. There is a box down in Zoom to have some questions answered. There's nothing in there yet, but Martine, did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to throw in there?
I think that as you think through what your plans are, I always believe in taking a look at the market today, what's happening. Do what you need to get those rents up, do what you need to get your books in order. If you're thinking about doing something today, having those conversations as early as possible so that we can guide you, because we want for you to succeed. That's why we have good businesses. This is why Ben has been doing this for 18 plus years. This is why I've been able to be in real estate for 10 years, is that we are servants first and want to make sure that you are getting what you need to out of this. We believe in building other people's wealth, and we're here via text, via email, via a phone call. We want to hear from you, even if you're not doing something today. I think that you can't stress that we are your partner in doing in real estate, and we want to be here to guide you, whether it's today, tomorrow, or at no point that you sell or buy. But we're here to help you because we know that, like with your tenants, the relationship matters, right? And
Yeah.
we're here to be in relationship with you.
Yeah. And like you touched on earlier, this process started early is so important because it's not like you can say, hey, it's Thursday, let's get my property on the market next week. Anybody who does that for you is not, they're not doing their due diligence in helping you achieve what you want to achieve. And again, this conversation we had with the condo owner last week, we talked her out of doing a sale. The best advice for her was, don't sell your property right now. It's going to cost you $50,000 to $75,000, and that's going to leave you nothing to do what you want to do. Like, it makes more sense. Move back into the property in a year, live in there for 2 years, then you can sell it and take it tax free. So we pushed a potential deal 3+ years down the road in order to do the right thing with this tenant. And I stressed this on the webinars with Dan. We're going to stress it again. Our job is to provide as much value as we possibly can, or our goal, I should say, is to provide as much value as we possibly can, so that when the time comes to have these conversations, you think of us to ask for our advice, and you give us a seat at the table to ask the questions. We're not expecting to get every deal out of everybody who comes to these things. But we would love to at least have earned the opportunity to have a discussion with you. We don't have any questions popping up, which is fantastic. Everybody I'm seeing on here, it comes to every single one of my webinars. It is fantastic to see all these people showing up time and time again. I really do appreciate your support. And if we don't have any questions pop up anytime soon, I think we're going to call it. Thank you so much for everybody's time tonight. We're going to get you out of here a little bit early. Going to make sure no hands are raised. Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. And we will talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye.